So welcome to tonight's session. Training topics are report writing skills in terms of contact reports and family support work shift logs. And I'll hand over now to Daisy and Mariana. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Art, and thank you everyone for coming along this evening. So I think I've met some of you, which was a nice treat with this remote work that we normally do together. And I know that I have read and edited a lot of your reports as well. So it's really nice to meet you on screen, and thank you for investing the time in this process, as Art said. So report writing, as we know, really is such an important part of the work that you do. It's really the way that you consolidate all the excellent work that you do in the contact room or wherever it might be, and how you convey this and the impact of what's happening in those sessions to all parties that are involved in the process. So what are the aims of the training this evening? I'd like to start by saying that the reports that you write are really very good, and I really mean that. So the aim of our training, well, there are several strands really. One is to make them even better. Two is really to make it easier for you to write them to be as good as they can be. I appreciate that it's quite a commitment of time to write up the reports after sessions that you've supervised, and we really do want to make this as straightforward a task for you as we possibly can. Now, the knock-on effect of this, of course, will be that there'll be less editing and querying to be done by us proofreaders, and that is fine by us. And again, should mean fewer emails back and forth between us and you to query things that perhaps aren't quite right. And ultimately, of course, if we streamline the process with our report writing and improve the output, then the really very important content of your reports is going to be much more accessible to all end users of the reports, which means they'll be of even greater value to the families that you're supporting with your work. So how are we going to do it? So I think the most important thing is to have clear and consistent guidelines that everybody understands and that are easy to follow. So as Art said, Mandy, my fellow proofreader covering East Sussex, and Mariana and I have produced firstly a new version of the contact report template, which you should all have a copy of, as well as a new shift log template, the summary day report now, and an almost exhaustive style sheet or style encyclopedia, really, which stipulates the rules of the AGFS house style and addresses some commonly confused aspects of writing. So we've really tried to take into account all of the discrepancies that we've observed in reading reports, both in how contact supervisors write them and also how proofreaders edit them. And we've consulted extensively with all parties who engage with the reports. So I really hope that after this evening's session, everybody will be on the same page, excuse the pun, with what is expected of them in terms of report writing, and we'll really strive to write reports that follow the guidelines that we'll have covered. And I'd also like to say that we, for our part, as proofreaders, will endeavour to edit consistently and on the basis of necessity, bearing in mind that our aim in editing your work is to ensure clarity and professionalism rather than to impose our own style on yours. So there will always obviously be some influence of personal writing style and preference on both sides, but the underlying commitment will be that we will all adhere to the main principles and conventions that we've laid out in the templates and the style guide, and our aim as a company will be to represent these in the reports that we produce. So I just want to very briefly explain why I would like you to listen to me on this. So I have always had a really innate love of language and never been able to sleep if I've spotted a misplaced apostrophe in my bedtime book. I have a first in Russian and linguistics from Oxford, and the written words in English and Russian has always featured extensively in my career. So I've read and edited a lot of published materials and web content for a range of businesses, worked extensively as a translator, so I've always had to be meticulous in my written communication, so I do pride myself on being so. I've been working for AGFS for nearly 2 years now, and in that time I've read well over 1,000 reports. So if I combine that experience with that of Mandy, and of course all the other proofreaders and managers we've consulted, then we're basing what we're advising you tonight on a real wealth of experience in the work that you're doing. So I really hope that what we cover this evening will really benefit you in your future report writing. So this evening, I intend firstly to walk you through the revised contact report template, which you should have a copy of, but I'll focus in on my screen. And then if you could note any questions down as we go through that, and then put them to me at the end of that section, that'd be great. And then I will hand over to Mariana, who would take us through the summary day report template. And after this, we'll zoom in on a few points from the revised style sheet if we have time. And again, we can take questions on that. And then at the end, we will have a little quiz just to consolidate everything that we will have been through and to highlight any areas that need a bit more focus. One of the documents you should have received is a dummy contact report that we'll be looking at that point. So firstly, the contact report template. I'm just going to share my screen now and bring that one up. Sorry, just give me 1 second. Right.
Yeah, we can see this. We can see the template, Daisy.
It's not showing me quite the right version just as of yet. Let me just move some things around. There we go. So this is the one that we want to look at first. Okay. So there are several ways in which we've revised this template. On the simplest level, we've tried to make the rules regarding house style and formatting as clear and consistent as they can be. And on the other, we've tried to reframe the requirements for what to include in terms of content, and how to make the reports as easy to write and as useful to read as possible. We've actually sent you 2 copies of this new template. One is the one that we're looking at the moment, which has purple copy there. That is for guidance, which we will go through now and which you will probably want to keep to hand, at least in the early stages when you're using this new template, because it has detailed guidelines about each section and examples to put in many of them as well. But the one that you will actually fill out when you come to use this new template is a blank template that we've sent you also. Okay, so going back to absolute basics with this one, but I know that this is an important point for managers. Please do name your files correctly when you write your contact reports. So name them with the case name starting with a capital letter followed by contact report, then the date and the usual AGFS style format. Starting from the top here, just a little reminder about formatting. So the font in the main body of the report needs to be Arial 11, and you need to have 1.15 line spacing with justified text in the main body of the report. So again, as I'm sure you're aware, this is where we check that the text is justified. So it goes to the left and the right margin, and we can check the line spacing here. And as I say, for the main body, it should be 1.15 point. Please note the way that we write times and dates. So we have 6-digit notation for the dates. So here for the 9th of September, 9.9.23. So we don't add a 0 before a single digit number like that when we're writing the date. And going back to the top line of the box here, subject children's first names. In this box, we would like you please to write the names of all children, all subject children linked to this case, regardless of whether they're booked to attend this contact session in particular. And we would also like you now, please, to include the age of each child in brackets for context and easy reference. Moving down the box, please include the names of all session participants in the order shown. So we're starting now with subject children's names and first names only, no surname there, followed by the lead parent, and then any other family members, and then any professionals involved with the case. Here we've got a foster carer, and then the contact supervisor there at the bottom. One slight change that we have made is that if you do reference a contact supervisor or another AGFS employee in the body of the report, please can you continue to put the initial letter of their surname, as we do in this participants box, just for clarity, and so as not to confuse their first names with those of the children in the body of the report. Last couple of things about the top of this box here. Please note the way that we write times. So we use a 12-hour clock where the full stop between the hours and the minutes, and denoting AM or PM. You don't need to repeat that if they are the same for the start and the end time. And then AGFS's preferred way of separating a range of times is to use a dash. Excuse me, it is not to use a hyphen there, not an end dash. And this is all clearly stipulated in the style guide as well. Final thing up here, because this is something that occurs quite frequently. If in the event a contact report start time is delayed or possibly brought forward, then that is actually noted in transport details down here. So in this top box here, we always put the booked session time, excluding handovers. And if there is any change to that in the event, then we just explain that down here in transport details. Okay, so moving down to contact summary. This we really do want to give some quite robust advice on, because I think some people struggle to know what to include in this. I think the best way for us to describe what we'd like you to put in contact summary is for you to imagine that you're responding to your manager asking how this contact session went. So it really is a snapshot of the contact and an introduction to what the reader is going to read in the report. So we've written here that a tip is to write this section last. A possible alternative is that as you sit down with your notes from the contact, you just think, oh, how did that session with David, or whoever the child, whatever the child is called, go, and just really try and simply give an impression of that. So often it will be a brief description of a contact session. Sometimes there will be something that caused concern during the contact, but whatever it was that characterized that contact session, record it briefly here in 3 or 4 lines only. So no detail is required. It is simply an introduction to what we will read below. Transport details and handovers, we have actually expanded quite a bit, most notably to specifically include handovers. So we'd like all these prompts in the bracketed copy in black here to be attended to. So we would really like to know on every occasion with whom and how the children arrived, i.e. were they on time, early, late, etc. And we really want to know, regardless of who transported them, how the children presented. As I'm sure you appreciate, before the main session, when perhaps the children feel a bit more observed and scrutinized begins, it can be really telling before that part begins to assess how a child is feeling in relation to the contact and their relationship to the family member they're meeting. So it's really important to document how they seemed when they arrived. With regard to physical presentation, if there is anything notable with regard to their clothing, then record this. For example, if their clothes looked ill-fitting or dirty, or their hair was a mess, or of course there could be something even more telling that you notice physically at that point. So it's really important to note anything you observed here. We also want to know whether the participating parent arrived on time and anything with their arrival that's of note. And if there are handover procedures, then please document if there was any issue with these. This might also be the place where you record something an adult said to you, perhaps on the incoming handover. So this could be a feeding or changing instruction, for example, that will impact the activities in the main session to come. If there is too much to put in this section, or for any comments made on the outgoing handover at the end of contact, I would be inclined to leave that for anything else at the end of the report. Okay, so I'm moving on to the main session. This section, I hope we've reframed significantly enough to make it a more workable model for you. So this really is the opportunity to tell the story of the contact in a chronological order, starting with greetings, ending with goodbyes, and with what happened within those 2 moments in between. So this should be an accurate account of the key moments of the contact, but it should not simply be a transcription of your notes. So you must be selective. We do not need to know everything that happened in the contact. So what we're looking for are key moments that take us through from the beginning of this contact to its end. And of course, we're not asking you to omit anything important or critical. But it's better to choose 2 or 3 meaningful examples that illustrate the quality of interaction between the child and the parent and tell us something about their relationship than to simply list every action or conversation observed during the session. So what we're looking for really is more detail about fewer things. So when you sit down to write your reports, please scrutinize your notes and highlight those things that you recorded that will be meaningful to the reader, and trust yourself and your experience. So you will know which examples are really telling from a contact session, and it is those that you can focus in on. I hope that I can reassure you that you'll have the chance to make all of your observations that you think are worth mentioning in a new section which we put together below, but that is not what this main session is for. So the main session is there to record in chronological order meaningful examples of what happened during the session. So it's the same with quotes that you use. So please do not transcribe conversations unless they tell us something meaningful about the behavior of the participants and the relationship between them. So again, you will need to use your judgment here because it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. So a toddler might not say something which in itself is critical in terms of meaning to an adult, and neither will an adult to a toddler, but detailing some conversation between an adult and a toddler obviously can be a neat way of illustrating the relationship between them, how comfortable the child is, how patient the parent is, what kind of language they use to the child, etc. But again, really scrutinize the quotes before you put them in and test them to make sure they play a role in illustrating the quality of interaction between the participants. As it says in the bracketed copy here, we're looking to evidence the parenting skills and emotional engagement of all parties throughout this account. So any quote that you include really has to contribute to that. One of the most important things to remember is that we are interested in the interaction between the participants. So for every interaction reported, describe the reaction. Now, this is one of the pitfalls, or potential pitfalls, that will mean a report gets returned to you with a query if you fail to report both sides here, because it really is so important. So if you write that the child approached the mother for a cuddle, we need to know what the mother's reaction was. Did she respond to this? How? And it would be the same for a question or a meaningful comment that is put to a child by a parent or to a parent by a child. So if the father asks the child how he's getting on at school, then you must tell us what the response was. And if there was no response, tell us that, because that is meaningful in itself. this main session is also the section where we want to be as specific as possible in detailing the facts as to what food and gifts were given, food and drink consumed, and any places that they might have visited. So this is the place to list these things in detail as and when they arise in the chronological narrative. And there is information on how to write these correctly in terms of medicines, brand names for food, names of games played, that kind of thing, in the updated style sheet. So another very important note on style, throughout our reports, we want our language to be as neutral and our observations to be as objective as possible. So we want to avoid colouring our observations with adjectives that are not backed up by examples. So it is always better to say what food was provided than to write that a nutritious lunch was given. It's better to describe a gift rather than say that they gave a lovely present. If the mother puts on a film, we want to know what the name and the age rating was, rather than simply saying that it was age appropriate. And the same for statements such as, the children seem to really enjoy this activity. So how do we know? Describe what you observed to support this. Try to use neutral language throughout and describe objectively what you saw and heard. And crucially importantly, keep your sentences simple and direct. Avoid using passive constructions like the baby was fed, but tell us simply who fed the baby and how. And keep your language simple. It does not need complicated grammatical structures to sound professional. English is complicated enough. So what we really want are simple, clear sentence structures where it is clear who did what, to whom, and how. Okay, now key observations. Let's move that out of the way. So this new section replaces and encompasses the existing categories of parenting observations, emotional warmth, and interactions between parents. And it should provide you with a place to highlight those observations that are going to be of most importance and use to the end users of the report, without the need to try and squeeze them into the chronological account of the context session. So this format should ensure that no observations or behaviours that were repeated in the course of a session, for example, are omitted, and that end users can access this information quickly and easily. So it's essentially more of a detailed end summary of your report, highlighting the main issues relating to the context and specific to this case. So in many ways, it's what the report is all about. We've had the factual account of what happened above in the main session, but this is where we make sense of what it all means, and we tie together all of these examples of participant behaviour, emotional interactions, parenting competencies, and any other observations specific to the case. So these points in bold under key observations there that I've just read out should always be used as a guide to help you complete this section. And please note that whilst we use the word conclusion here, any conclusions that you draw are wholly factual conclusions. So you can make general comments about how the participants behaved in relation to these different areas, but only where these have been detailed with examples in the main session that you might reference down here in key observations, or where you're able to give examples in this section. So we hope that this should be a really helpful section for anything that, had you tried to include it in the main session, would have interrupted the chronological flow because it happened on multiple occasions perhaps, or indeed throughout the contact. So this could apply to things like trips to the toilet even, so that they're recorded, but they don't have to be mentioned every time in the story of the contact in the main session. Or with regard to behaviour, so a statement about how engaged the parent was throughout contact, for example, and how the child responded, but only where you have shown this in an example or two in the main session. We can also answer how the participants interacted emotionally here. So with the previous heading, that tended to be where people put the most detail about greetings and goodbyes. So you will have covered greetings and goodbyes now in the main session. So here you really have the chance in terms of emotional interaction to write some really insightful comments about how they interacted emotionally, how the participants behaved, and what level of parenting competencies were shown, and also a response to anything else that warrants particular consideration with a particular case. So I know sometimes writers struggle to know where to fit in a detail that they really think needs attention with a particular case, but it doesn't quite neatly fit into the report template that we've been working with. So an example might be, say, where there is a father who often makes big promises to the child and frequently fails to deliver. So you might want to record what you observed that was relevant to this issue today. So rather than record every incidence of that behavior in the main session, you might include one or two there. And then down in key observations, you might say something like, the father made several references in the course of the contact to future plans with John, including promising to decorate the Christmas tree together and have him over for a sleepover in the new year. John seemed excited at these plans and said he would look forward to them, that kind of thing. So you fully recorded the observation and it's there for reference to look back on as your support with the family progresses, but you haven't needed actually in the main session story to include multiple examples of that behavior. In terms of the content of the previous report template that it's now encompassing, this would also be the place where you describe how multiple parents at a contact interacted, or perhaps how relations between a foster carer and a parent seemed when they met, that kind of observation. So it's quite an open section insofar as what you will need to put in there will vary with each case, but make good use of it, because it should contain enough robust information that if a social worker read only the contact summary and these key observations, they would have an extremely good idea as to how this contact went and how the needs of the children participating were met. Anything else? We've added a little bit more guidance here, but essentially the content of this bit will remain the same. So it is for, as I mentioned above, perhaps comments that require passing on or following up that were made by an adult on the outgoing handover, or anything else that might need further investigation or reporting back on, that kind of thing. So as I say, largely unchanged, but there's a little bit more guidance there in the purple copy for you. So that is the end of my walkthrough of the new template. So I will hand over to Mariana now, who will give you some guidance on the new summary day report.
Right, thanks so much. Let me just share the new summary day report with you so that we can all observe it together. Which hopefully is visible on the screen now. Yep, all okay.
Yes, it is.
Brilliant. Okay, that's great. Well, thank you so much, Daisy, for your, part. What I will be focusing on is summary day report. With regards to summary day reports, as some of you may know, these are completed on our intensive cases. And so as you will see, compared to our current template, there's lots of things that remain the same and consistent with our usual formatting. So the font size, the alignment, line spacing all remains the same, but there are some changes which I would like to highlight. So first of all, previously these logs, these reports used to be called summary day and summary night logs. So now we are calling them, the name of these reports are summary day report and summary night report. This is also in the name of the report. So it's called, the name is basically the name of the family, summary day report or summary night report plus the date. For this particular family, it would be Smith summary day report and the date, which would be 8th of November 2023. At the very top, we have the usual formatting with one change. So the family name is with the first capital letter only. And previously it used to be all capital. Now also it's in black font. It used to be in red font. So that's the most kind of major change in this part. All the rest remains the same. In terms of how we refer to the children and adults, that also remains the same. So it's a little bit different to what we do in our contact reports, as the parents are called by the first names and the children by the initials. However, now we will also be including the ages of children in brackets. And this is because it will provide readers with this information easily without the need to refer to other documents. With regards to all other adults, so we use their full name on the first mention, and we would always like to mention their role and relationship to the family in brackets. And then as we kind of refer to them later in the log, we would like to use only their first name. So for example, in this log, we have Michelle Brown. We make clear her relationship to the family. So in brackets, we include she's the maternal grandmother. However, when we refer to Michelle later in the log, in this section, we include her first name only. So we don't need to include her surname. We don't need to say again that she's the maternal grandmother, because already the reader has the information here in this section. When we kind of look further in the report, for all the sections except for the summary at the very top, we use bullet point formatting. So that's a little bit different compared to contact reports. Now, basically for consistency, we use bullet point formatting throughout the whole report, which now also applies to the very last section at the very bottom. So that's, I think, the kind of most significant change in terms of bullet point formatting. On the ruler, these bullets are set to 0 centimeters, and the text is indented at 1 centimeters, and this needs to be applied consistently throughout the log. So in all of the sections, the bullet point formatting needs to be consistent and the same. Right. When we move to the summary section, Daisy has already very helpfully provided lots of very useful information about this. So what I would like to just perhaps highlight, this section really needs to be very, very short. So ideally maximum 5 lines or even shorter. What we would definitely like to include in this section, any concerns or anything unusual that happened during the shift. So anything we would definitely like the reader know just from looking at the summary that happened during the shift needs to be included in the summary. However, we would not like to go into too much detail. Also, just to mention, we would not like to include in this section anything that's not then evidence in the main text. So I would say a very helpful tip for this section would be to leave it first, write the log, and then return to this section as the very last. So we would really like to complete this section at the very kind of end of the writing process. And that kind of should help to know what to include in this section and to summarize it in just those kind of 3 to 5 sentences and to make it brief. When we move to the next section, that's the parents and children's physical and emotional presentation and home conditions. Again, this is another section that really should be quite short, ideally 3 bullet points, as we can see in the dummy text. These sections should provide reader the information about presentation of each family member on arrival and also throughout the shift, if applicable. So what we would really like to comment on is things such as physical presentation, physical health, emotional presentation, mental health, if applicable, and also the mood of each family member. And what's important is also to include any significant changes that we might observe kind of throughout the shift. One of the bullet points we should focus also on home environment and how what we observed in terms of home conditions. So if we look at the dummy text, we have 3 bullet points here. In the very first bullet point, we are commenting about the mother and the father. What I would like to highlight in this section, here we are saying that the mother was unwell, physically unwell, she suffered with a cold. But what we are also including is whether or not it affected her care. And in terms of this particular report, it didn't, which is really positive. But it's really, really good to note in terms of if there's any concerns, for example, parents struggling with physical health or mental health, or if perhaps there's any changes in the mood, we would also like to include whether it affected their care, as that's what we are really kind of interested to know. The second bullet point in that focuses on the children and how they presented throughout the shift. As Daisy already explained previously, it's really helpful when we made observations that perhaps may be a little bit subjective, such as here we are saying the children were dressed in appropriate clothes. We would really like to back it up with facts. So basically we include what the children were actually dressed in the day. GS was dressed in baby grow and HS was dressed in jumper and trousers. So that's also kind of really important to think about if we include any kind of subjective statements in the log, in the report. The last bullet point comments on the home conditions. And, again, we make some subjective statements here. We say home conditions look tidy on arrival, but then we support it with facts and examples. So we basically describe what the worker actually observed in the shift. And, this basically provides, backs up, that subjective statement. If, so basically that's a very good structure when it comes to this particular section. We include 3 separate bullet points to comment on the parents, mother and father separately, the children, and then home conditions. Right, if we move to the next section, that's the parenting capacity. And now when we get to this part really is meant to be chronological. So we would be commenting on what the parents did throughout the days. We would be commenting on routines, and also how did the parents meet their children's needs, how they were able to keep them safe. We would also like to comment on emotional warmth and interactions. And what I would just like to highlight is really the interactions and quality of the interactions that are really good to focus on in this part. So when we look at the dummy text, there are some examples of quite positive interactions, but we are providing information that the father fed GS, that he changed his nappy, which of course is really important to note. But what we are really focusing on are the interactions. So we are looking at what he did when the feed happened or nappy change, what did it actually look like? So basically it's things like, for example, did the father give the full attention to the child? Was there enough eye contact, or perhaps was the child was the parent a little bit distracted, were they looking at their phone or perhaps watching TV? So anything in those lines, we would really like to know that. Also, how did they handle the child? Were they kind of gentle enough? When the father chatted to the child, it's of course really helpful to include examples of what they said, but what's really good also to include what tone of voice they used. So we just really want to kind of focus on quality of those interactions. Also, as we can see here, we are including response of the child, which, as Daisy already mentioned in the previous part, is really important. So this is just to kind of illustrate what kind of responses we are getting. If there's any kind of unusual response, for example, in terms of, let's say, feeding, the child might be kind of looking away from the parent, we would like to make sure that we include that in the log, as those can be, quite important. Similarly, when we kind of move down, there's comment about the play. We really would like to include detail about how that looked like. So we would like to comment on how the parent was stimulating the child. Was it appropriate to their age? Of course, we would like to avoid commenting on whether or not we thought it was appropriate. We would just like to provide enough examples and back it up with the facts and description of what actually we observed. In the text, where we comment on what verbal interaction look like, and that the child engaged really well. Again, these are subjective statements. So again, it's really important to support it with facts and examples. So here in this particular log, so we are including how the mother engaged with the child, what were the verbal interactions, how they looked like. And then we include also responses of the child that, she pointed to the animals and she repeated it back to the mother, which is, again, really helpful for us to comment on that in the report. Right. So in terms of, the play, I mean, sometimes one of the things why it's so important to include comments about this verbal interaction and how it looked like is because sometimes, some parents can really struggle with that. And so, they may need a little bit more support in this area. So if we make sure that we comment on it in the report, actually, we can highlight it to the social record, which can be really helpful. If in terms of our observations when it comes to, feeding, nappy changing, playing, etc., we see, things happening really consistently throughout kind of every interaction. We do not note it every single time. Perhaps what we could do to keep the report concise, we can always summarize. So perhaps, if we see, some interactions happening consistently throughout the shift, we can include perhaps one bullet point that would explain this or summarize to the reader. So we could include what we actually observed in terms of feeds, nappy changes, and so on. Also, kind of just to note about this section, but also this applies to the log as the whole. When we note things about feeds, about nappy changes, and so on, as Daisy already commented on, we would just really like to avoid any passive constructions. So we would always like to include who did any given task, just to make it clear to the reader. We would also like to be really specific when it comes to any times and amounts. So when we look at the tummy text, we can see that, we are commenting here that GS was fed 120 milliliters of milk from his 150 milliliters bottle. And it's really helpful to comment on it this way, because basically we are not only saying how much milk the child has taken, but also how much milk was offered, which, in cases perhaps with families that have, learning difficulties, that can be really important information to include in the report. Sometimes, what happens is, there's the same amount of milk offered, regardless of how perhaps, the child is feeding. So sometimes, we have child that, is consistently taking the full amount of milk, and perhaps, this amount needs to be increased. So we would always like to include this information to make sure that the social worker is aware of this, and, perhaps the parents might need a little bit of more support and advice in this area. We are also giving information as to how long GS spent in his bouncy chair. And again, this is important information to know, because sometimes, the children can spend a long, amounts of time in their cot or bouncy chairs. So this type of information, it's really helpful to just make very clear in the log. We also say, what time the feed finish, what time GS was taken to the cot, how long it took to soothe him down, and when he woke up. So it's really helpful to be very specific when it comes to just giving information about these things. What I would like to highlight in terms of the report, although it's not shown in the dummy text, what's really, really helpful is in one bullet point to summarize all the feeds that were given to the child, or even give total amount of milk, also with the nappy changes and with times of the feeds and nappy changes, as this makes this information kind of readily available to the reader, so that they don't have to try to find it throughout the log, or they don't have to add up all the feeds. And actually, it's quite helpful to have it just summarized in one, bullet point. In terms of the next section, so this section, the parenting support. Here, we would like to comment in detail about what support was given to the parent. So perhaps any advice, that may have been requested, or, any modeling that might have, been done, or any time that we had to step in and, for example, for child safety and so on. What we would like to include in this part is we would like to say what was happening. So what was the situation, how we supported the parent, and also we would just like to make very clear if it was the parent who requested the support, or was it offered by us, and if so, why, which is also illustrated quite well in this part. We would like to include how the parent responded to our advice. So did they listen to it? Did they implement it? Which we can see in this section that they did not hover during the shift, even though the worker raised with them that this was needed, and so on. We would also just like to make sure that we include the response of the child, how, if perhaps the parent tried to, implement any of the techniques or, strategies to manage challenging behaviors, how did the child react to that? So as Daisy very helpfully included in the previous section, that response, it's always really important to include in our logs, just to give the reader full kind of understanding of the situation. When we move to the very, very last part, this part basically is there just to comment on anything that perhaps was not appropriate to include in any other parts. As mentioned already previously, this did not look, basically this formatting of this was not a bullet point, but now, just for the sake of consistency, we basically include this part as a bullet point as well. With regards to the log as a whole, I know that sometimes it can be really tricky to know what kind of information to include and what to left out, because obviously it's a long shift. It's 12 hours or perhaps 8 hours, 10 hours. So there's lots happening throughout the shift. My advice would be to always kind of try to highlight the best examples of what you are observing. And also just to keep in mind, in terms of the assessments, what are the questions with regards to the assessment? Because every case is a little bit different and we focus on different things. So sometimes it can be, child neglect that's, really important to focus on. Sometimes it can be, there's concerns about home conditions or perhaps parental mental health or drug use. So it really changes from case to case, but if we keep these, if we look at the assessment questions, we can see like it's really kind of important to focus on, and that helps to know actually what's really important to perhaps elaborate a little bit more in the actual report, and what perhaps is not as important. So let's say, there's a family, we know that home conditions are not really a concern. We don't really need to comment on it in lots of detail, but perhaps, there's another family where this might be a concern. So we would really like to make sure that there's enough detail included in the log. From my part, that's really it. That's hopefully, this is helpful. But of course, if there's any questions, please, do let me know. I would be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mariana. I was actually just going to say that I neglected to invite questions at the end of my template section. I'm going to pretend that's because there is a certain amount of overlap between the two formats, although obviously with notable differences that Mariana has talked us through. But yes, if there are questions for Mariana on the summary day report, or for me on the revised contact report template, please do let us know. Is that Catherine?
Let me unmute. Can you hear me? So I've got a couple of questions on the revised contact report template. So first of all, you've included foster carers now. Is that only if they stay for the session, or because they're involved in handovers, you always want us to include foster carers in that top section?
When you say the top section, do you mean actually the sort of participants box?
Participants section, yeah.
No, so they would only be included in there if they have actually played a role and participated in the contact session.
In the session, not just the handovers. Excellent. The other quick question, sorry. So you want us to talk about handovers. If we don't mention, is it okay to not mention anything if they've gone well, or do you always want us to put something like handover expectations were met if everything went smoothly?
I think my take on this is that really we'll look at an example in a bit actually, which would probably answer your question. I think that it's not necessary simply to state handover procedures were met, but it is useful to show how they were met. So
right, okay, some more detail.
Yes, exactly.
And more specific rather than a blanket statement.
Yes, so so show how they were met, or how they're broken, whichever it may be.
Thank you, Daisy.
Welcome.
Sorry to jump in. Mariana, could you maybe stop sharing screens now that you've finished? I think we'll reclaim the whole full screen. Thanks.
Yes, of course. Sorry, I completely neglected that. Let me just.
Easily done.
Sorry, I have a very awkward setup here, so let me just try to switch between my screens. Right. Okay, hopefully
There
that's
you
now
go.
resolved.
All done. Thank you.
Mhm.
Oh, I can see someone with a raised hand there. I'm not sure of your name.
Oh, sorry, it's my stupid phone. It's Nicole, Daisy.
Hi, Nicole.
It comes up as expedient for some obscure reason, and I can't for the life of me change it.
Oh,
Daisy, I've noted in the new template, you obviously want the ages of the children. Now, I just want to know if it's a baby, how would you like that documented? 0.6 for months or 6 MTHS if they're 6 months? A child who's 1 year, obviously 1 or 18 months. How would you like that documented? Because it's quite easy when they're 9 or 11, but when they're a baby, just what format would you like?
that is a very good question, and actually, I think you've caught us out on something we haven't thought of there, Nicole. So I don't know, Art, is there a convention that you would like us to adhere to with stating age and months?
Sorry, could I ask for the question to be repeated? I'm sorry, I just lost it halfway through.
Yeah, no problem. Art, with the ages of the children, if you have a baby, how would you like that documented? So if they're 6 months old, would you like it 0.6 or 6 MTHS? If they're over 1, do you want 1 year old or 18 months? Because obviously up until the age of 2, sort of there's quite a differential between a 1 year old and an 18-month-old. So how would you like that documented?
It is a good question. I mean, if it's an age that's less than 1 year of age, that would be a number of months, like 8 months,
Yeah, okay.
11 months, as
All right.
to between 1 and 2, where months are still quite significant in terms of
Yes.
developmental stages. I mean, I'm telling you this off the cuff here. This is something we're going to discuss further after the meeting and implement whatever it is we decide. But instinctively, it appears to me that up to the age of 2, if we include, if we say 18 months or 20 months, 22 months, and then from 2 years of age onwards, it's 2 or 3 or 4,
okay.
as an
That
idea.
makes
But
sense.
I'm not wanting to call any kind of final arrangements here, but that's one of the options which seems to me to be reasonable. But let's take a rain check on that, and
All right.
we'll
Thank
come
you.
back to you. Thank you.
Hi, it's Jill. Are we starting the new templates as of now, or?
This is definitely something that we recognise is, even if you have been able to participate in tonight's training and not everybody has, is obviously going to take some time to digest and to look at the resources that we'll be following up with. So I know that Art will be coming back to you on that, but it's not expected to be an as of tomorrow morning arrangement.
And I would agree. I would say that, yes, please feel free to start on the new templates as soon as you feel that you're ready, even if it is tomorrow morning. But it really shouldn't take longer than about a week or so for us to implement it across the company, that these are the templates we're using and the guidance as explained applies.
And obviously, I think that all of my wonderful proofreading colleagues are participating tonight as well, and they're obviously going to be really key in helping this transition and supporting you with sort of inevitable questions that you'll have along the way. And so, yeah. I can't see anybody else with a question at this point, unless I'm missing somebody.
I have one.
Oh, hi.
With the family support day summaries, what would you do if both the children have the same initials? Would there be another way to like differentiate which child is which?
I think that's a really good question. I mean, we've never had that situation. So I think that would, we would need to think about that, what to do. Yeah, but we never had, I think, Art, we never had that situation before that the children had the same names.
I can't recall any such situation, but it may occur.
So I have a family support case at the moment, and both the children have the same letter for their first name.
Right.
That's why I ask.
My suggestion would be to, for example, if it's Bob Smith and Brian Smith, one of them should maybe have a middle name initial in there. So Bob Sam Smith, BSS, and the other one Brian Smith, BS. So there is a difference there, but yeah, I think that could work.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I actually I remember there was a case where the children's initials look they were not the same, but they kind of looked very similar on the log. So what we actually did was we included the second letter of one of the children's names in the initial to kind of differentiate that. So that potentially could be another option if the child doesn't have a the middle name.
Can I ask everybody, how do you guys feel about the new templates, which are not a million miles away from what we've been doing, but they're much more, I think, helpful in a way of explaining how we need to write our reports and what it is that we need to be looking out for. I'd be interested in kind of your initial reactions beyond what's already been mentioned, if you are willing to offer such.
I think that possibly until I write one, it might be difficult to say. I think it's going to be getting the feel of the new template, isn't it? And I think it's probably going to be easier. Looking at it so far, I think it could be easier, and I hope it will be, because sometimes it's very easy. I find myself getting tied up in knots with certain points, and I'm hoping with this it will be more concise, and I can be more concise in my report. So I hopefully, looking at it, I think it should be easier, and that will be a good thing.
Thank you. That is one of the main aims of the whole exercise, to narrow the focus and make it easier and kind of more flowing and more relevant to what it is that we need to do. Anybody else?
I'd ditto to that. I'd say I'd have to use it first to be able to comment. I know when we had sort of the last template that we used and then we moved on to the current one, it did require some adjustment. So it will be a case of using it, but it does look more streamlined than the one that we currently use.
Sounds good. Thank you.
I did want to say just the same what Nicola said. Sorry, I jumped in. That it does clarification point by point, explaining what is expected in particular area. I think is going to be really helpful. But as my two colleagues said before, that is going to take time to adjust to the new plate, definitely.
Of course, that makes sense. And I would like to say as well that there's only so much that we can go through during this session, but a lot of work and consultation has gone into the materials and the resources that we've put together. So obviously the templates, but also the style guide that we'll have a little look at in a minute, and then the content report example and so on. So if you look at all of those resources and continue to make reference to them, both as you transition and then going forward writing reports, then hopefully between them they will give you a good supporting structure for writing the best reports. If there are no more questions at the moment, I did just want to have a little look at the style guide. We have really paid attention to any sort of recurring errors and any areas of uncertainty or inconsistency that we've seen occurring in report writing, and have tried to recognize and anticipate really any sticking points that you might encounter that will trip you up or threaten to trip you up when you're writing your report. So as I mentioned earlier, it's a bit of a style encyclopedia now, so it is really there for your ongoing reference. So we as proofreaders will pay attention to it. There are some things that are house style conventions, that is just the way that we have decided makes most sense in this context to write a word. And there are other things that to know that people find a little bit tricky sometimes. Things like, for example, reporting speech, how to punctuate, things like that. As I mentioned earlier, how to write brand names, all sorts of things that frequently occur, how to refer to, to the context of time within reports, all sorts of things. So please do have a look at that at your leisure and continue to refer to it as you're writing your reports. I think that given the time, it would probably be a good idea to move on to the contact report quiz, which you should have received. I'm going to share it on my screen now. So I think, let me just bring it up quickly. Okay, this now we are looking at the updated report style guide that I was referring to a moment ago. If there are any questions on that, if you had a chance to look at it now, then please do put them to me, but otherwise please use it for your reference going forward. So I have to make sure that I bring up the right version of this document. Okay, so there are a number of frequently occurring mistakes that I have slotted into this dummy report. There are 12, in fact. Some of them are matters of style, house style or convention. Some are sort of frequently occurring grammatical or spelling errors, and some are really omissions where perhaps the writer here of this dummy report hasn't quite hit the mark with regard to the content expectations that we have for a content report. So if you could just spend a couple of minutes having a little look at that, just bearing in mind what we've talked about this evening, and then we will have a look at it together and see which of those that we've been able to highlight. So I think in the documents that Sarah sent you today, it was file number 2, spot the mistakes. So just take a couple of minutes to look at that, and then we will have a look at it together. Okay, I don't mislead you and make you think that it only takes us a couple of minutes to thoroughly read through and check your reports, because that is not the case. But I don't want to leave you all sitting in silence for too long this evening while we're doing this. So hopefully you've had just enough time to have a little look at it. And I should also have said that I'm not expecting you, I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you to share your answers, although I would be interested to know if anybody had found 12 mistakes in this report. I am I can see her shaking heads. Let's okay, so let's have a look at the answers here. So as I say, there were a couple of simple ones just relating to format or style. So this is just a little reminder right here at the top that that would be the incorrect date format. So we don't put a 0 before a single digit date. Here, always be careful not to include the children's surnames when you're listing their names as subject children. And then here, there's an incorrect time format. So we need that second one, like the first one, to be 6:00 p.m. I know that these are small things, but it would be great if they could become automatic. They're in the AGFS style guide, and that's the way that we want our reports to look. They're not, obviously, none of these in themselves are something that we would return a report with a query on. They're things that we will edit. There are always things like that will occur, but those are just really ones to bear in mind that are part of our style guidance. This one in contact summary. So if in the venue at the top, you've written what the venue is, in this case, it's a simple contact center based contact. We really don't need to start the contact summary by saying that the session took place in the contact center. That's just unnecessary repetition, doesn't really tell us anything more than we already know. Obviously, if the venue was simply in the community Hastings, then you will certainly in the course of your report go into more detail about locations that were visited. But otherwise, please don't use up words when words are so precious in the 2 pages that you have to complete the report by repeating detail that we have elsewhere. Here, this is more of a content issue. So there's an omission here. So we haven't heard about the participating parent. So what about the father? Did he arrive on time? Did he, and if so, how did he adhere to handover procedures? So that is something that, as I say, we would be sending back to you and saying, we have a query. Please, can you complete this section and tell us about the arrival of the participating parent to contact. This in the main session is a similar example. So if you write, the father greeted the children with open arms and asked them for a hug, we need to know how the children responded to that. That's clearly a really key interaction, and we need to know what the children's reaction to that was. So we'll look at some possible solutions to these omissions in a minute. This is another one here. So the father suggested a timeout. Bob shouted, "No, I didn't do anything." The father put on an episode of Karate Sheep on his phone. That really doesn't quite match up. We don't have any reaction illustrated by the father to Bob's outburst, and that's something that we really would need to cover. If he didn't respond and he did simply put on an episode of Karate Sheep, then we need to make it clear that that was his response, no response. But otherwise, we need to explain what he did and what he said in response to that as a key parenting competency observation. Mariana talked about time references here. This obviously applies to really anything that you write in a report that might mean different things to different people. So here we've got after a while, often we read they did such and such for a short time or for a long time. And really, we need to be specific. So how long, after how long did the father suggest they stop watching and do something else? You know, again, that's really key to understanding the context of the different activities that happened within the contact session. We talked about quotes earlier, so the mistake here is an unnecessary quote. So again, if you really thought about this and read it out to yourself, and the father says, "I'm getting my Christmas tree on Sunday, I think I'll get it from the garden centre again," that's great, but it really doesn't tell us anything about the father's relationship to the child or his parenting competencies or anything that we're really interested in. So I don't think we would lose anything from simply moving from Bob and the father sat and chatted to moving on to saying that they're talking about Christmas, and that is something meaningful that has an impact on the father, and he has a reaction to that, which Bob, as you can see here, Julie has a reaction to himself. This is simply a common error that occurs. Just a little reminder, the past tense of text is texted. And this, in key observations, this example here of claimed, we've talked about keeping our language throughout report writing as neutral as possible. And claimed here and usually will be too nuanced a word to use. So with this example, when Sam was playing with the pirate ship, I saw him put a small toy in his mouth and crawl under the table. I told the father, who claimed he had not seen him do this and did not take any action. It really sounds as if you're implying that you suspect that the father had perhaps seen him do it, but decided not to take any action. And really, we want to be so careful to show that we're viewing everything that we observe as objectively as possible and reporting in a like way. The final one down here is really just to illustrate how, if you have provided sufficient detail in the main session with regard to foods given and consumed or whatever it may be, then in key observations, it is possible to summarize this slightly. So we don't need to repeat the full list of what food was provided by the father, because we've listed that above. So it's enough here to say something along the lines of the father provided a selection of the boys' favourite foods, because again, this is a point that has been explained in the main session. We obviously have to be careful with describing foods as nutritious, because that can mean different things to different people. I think in this instance, if I hadn't included crisps in the list, then I may have got away with saying that he provided nutritious food here, because again, we've said what it is above, we've said that it was homemade, and we've shown exactly what it was that was provided and eaten. Here I'm just going to show you a version of this dummy report where we've corrected the mistakes we went through. So there's the simple ones at the top, that's the date in the correct format, Bob and Sam without their surname, the time frame, the time range in the correct format. And here,
Excuse me,
yeah.
Can I just ask, the report person is, sorry, I'm scrolling, Sam D, and the contact supervisor is Emma D. Is it on purpose or is just
no?
This is the first thing I spotted, and then you didn't make any comment on that, so I just kept quiet. But I was waiting to the end.
Thank you for pointing it out. It turns out I have a baker's dozen of mistakes in this report, as it turns out. So no, that is actually unintentional. There's been a fair amount of we've been working on these templates. So thank you for pointing it out. And no, we will amend Emma to, or no, in fact, I think we'll make the one at the top Emma, because we have Sam now in the report. So no, thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, that is simply something that we need to put right. Okay, so yeah, the context summary, this is highlighted just to show that we really want to get straight in there with the context summary. Like I say, we don't want to repeat unnecessary detail. We just want to say how it went. So that's what we start off straight away with. And here we've been able to sum it up in 3.5 lines. This is where we had an omission where there was no mention of the participating parent. So here we've simply said the father arrived on time and set up the room ready for the children. So that having taken place within the handover period, that comes under this section rather than the main session, which will always begin with the greeting between the children and the participating parent. This is where we've completed the omission that we had with regard to the children's response to the father greeting them with open arms and asking for a hug. Bob said, "Hi, Dad," and ran up to him and cuddled him. Sam hung back and did not say anything. And again, that's an important point. We mustn't we have to be careful, obviously, where there are multiple children, to not to suggest that they both did all the things equally. Make sure that we specify where each of them has a different reaction to something, and in the same way as we describe how each of them presented emotionally and physically on arrival. There are quite a few things that I've tried to shoehorn into this dummy template that you will see as you refer back to it. So we've got Twister there. As I say, that often we get questions about how correctly to write brand names and that kind of thing. Like I say, those are all in the style guide, but there are quite a few of those things in this dummy report. This was an omission where we didn't see how the father reacted to Bob's outburst. So I've included the sentence, "The father calmly but firmly said, 'Bob, that's enough,' and asked both boys to sit on the sofa with him." This was the time reference that was too vague previously. We don't need to say 23 minutes later, and we don't need to put an actual time on things unless, as Mariana was describing earlier, it's with regard to something critical like the feed or the change or key care of a baby ordinarily, but we do need to be specific, even if it's an approximate time frame. So after about 20 minutes here, the father suggested they stop watching and do something else. And then we've removed the superfluous garden centre phrase, moving straight on to, as they began to talk about what they were going to do at Christmas, the father appeared to become emotional. If we'd ended that there, I don't think we would have been right to use the word emotional. But as Mariana was impressing on us earlier, if you do make a statement like that and something that sounds a bit subjective, then it always has to be backed up with solid examples of what you observed. So in this case, we say that he appeared to become emotional and follow that up with, he looked tearful and his voice cracked as he said. We've got texted there. We've changed the claimed to said. And then at the bottom, as I say, we have summarized the foods that were given earlier rather than having to list them again, because we did that up in the main session. And then this wasn't obviously relating to a mistake, but down at the bottom, just as an example of the kind of thing that goes into anything else, then this is something that if it relates to details that we've read about in the report, but it is a message that the father asked the contact supervisor to pass on to the mother following contact at the end of the contact session. So that is why that would appear down there. So this is, yeah, there's Sam and Emma that we need to tweak, but once we have done that, then this is a clean copy of this contact report example. So we will send that out to you with the link to the recording after the Zoom. And as I say, I have tried to illustrate as many of the points with regard to style, format and content as I could within these 2 pages. So do refer back to it, and I hope that it makes some of the things that we've talked about and some of the things in the template and the style guide make sense in action as you return to writing your reports.
Can
So,
I just ask a question?
yes, of course.
I've only ever been a secondary contact supervisor, so I've never had to write the report. But the lead contact supervisor described herself in the third person. So the contact supervisor rather than saying I. So is that the way we should do? Is it okay to put I?
It is okay to
rather
put,
than-
yeah,
it is
it's okay to put I, and if there is a second contact supervisor involved whose name is listed in the participants box at the top, then if they are referenced, then please use their name plus the initial of their surname. Don't say the other contact supervisor or etc. So so that it's absolutely clear who we're talking about with everything.
That's fine. It's very awkward to think of yourself in the third person. So
It is, yeah.
okay, thank you for clarifying that.
So how are we doing for time? We'd start a little bit late. We're a little bit over time. If there are any pressing questions, then if everyone is able to stay for those, then I'd be happy to answer them. But as far as presenting to you the new resources and guidelines at your disposal, that is the end.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Mariana. Are there any final questions before we wrap this up, please? No? Well, then I'd like to end with thanking Daisy and Mariana for excellently delivered and very helpful presentations, as well as all those who have contributed to the training preparation process. That includes our team managers and our proofreading team, of course. Well, extended thanks to the proofreading team and our team managers for their work in helping produce high quality reports, for which we have now firmly established a very good reputation nationally. Our reports and the quality of our reports are regularly commented on in a positive way, but by professionals we interact with. So thank you. And of course, great thanks to our family support workers and contact supervisors for writing these reports and for their dedication to making those reports the best that they can be. And that process is, of course, ongoing for us all. Should you have any questions or comments about the content of tonight's presentations, then please don't hesitate to speak to your allocated proofreaders, your team proofreaders, who will be able to no doubt assist you with those. And to finish up, may I suggest that all participants tonight should really aim to use the new template by next Monday, which is the 11th. So we've got some kind of time frames here. And also I'd like to suggest that staff who have not been able to attend training tonight should aim, and this will be communicated to all our staff, of course, after tonight. So staff who have not taken part in the training tonight should really look to implement and use the new templates no later than Monday, the 18th of November. So that's in just under 2 weeks from tonight. Okay, so thank you all for your time. Once again, thank you for the presenters, to the presenters for what they've done. It's been amazingly helpful, and I wish you all a very good night, and I hope to see you soon. And a Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.